Hello, my name is Lilo Siegel. I've just been asked to do a tutorial for you about my industrial Pfaff sewing machine. You ask yourself why I know something about it? Well, my knowledge comes from the fact that I come from an old tailors and dressmakers family. I myself am in the 5th generation in this occupation. I must have been about 6 years, I believe, when I sat down on my father's industrial sewing machine for the first time, doing the very first stitches. But what is an industrial sewing machine? They are high precision mechanical machines. Built to a high quality, they require a minimum of maintenance and are relatively simple to use. Built for continuous use and to last over many years. There are many different makes of machines, for example from the companies Dürrkop, Singer, Brother, Wilcox and Gibbs, Pfaff and so on. There's so many different kinds. You find them on the market. And they're also made for many different jobs, each machine. So what is the difference to the household machine? First of all, they most of the time quite fragile and unpredictable. Of course, therefore, you can do many different jobs with one and the same machine, as the straight stitching, the zigzag, buttonholes, embroideries, fancy stitching, many different things. So maybe it must be your decision if you want one of each, if your money is allowed again. But the household machine is never my choice. My first choice is my industrial Pfaff sewing machine with a needle transport. And that's what I'm going to tell you all about it, my happy little Pfaff machine. My industrial Pfaff sewing machine is the model 561, which I have since about 25 years, and it runs the same as on the first time I had it. Mainly also because I really try to take care of it. The main point of that is that you always watch out for your oil stand. Any kind of machine that doesn't get the right kind of oil that's specially made for this machine, you will get problems. It will run dry and it can break down at any time. You see the two levels here. This is where you put the oil in with a little oiling can. It's enough if you stay slightly above the red point. Of course, when I fill it new, I go quite high on about 3/4. I never fill it all the way to the top. And even that is already enough to keep the machine always running very well. So we will start right now on the top. You will see I got a big arm stand for my spool pins to hold. On this machine you only need 2, because you need one for your bobbins to fill them, and you need one spool for your upper thread. So in my case I have my upper thread on this left holder here. You first of all thread it through the top, coming down, and right here you have the first thread guide. Don't be too lazy to only pull it through that hole. There is a reason why there is 2 holes. So go in the top as if it likes to follow the way. That's the way you go with your thread. So here we get to the next thread guides. Also there, don't be lazy. Don't just put it through one, because it all has a certain function to really keep your threading very well with the tension and everything for whatever you're going to be sewing. You see, also there, don't pull it over the top. It could put too much tension on, which you don't want. Always choose the easiest and closest and direct way to thread it through. Then you go towards the back, and here's the first one that will easily guide it down. Also there, you put it right there where the spring is. Now comes a very important point. This is a tension disc. It has 2 concave discs put together with the convex sides facing each other. The thread presses between the two. That's why we do this right now here. You can see with a certain tension I can put it in between. You see when I pull this, the tension of the thread is adjusted by a spring and nut which increases or decreases the pressure. A little feather that's right above it will tighten this when you're doing your stitching. Also, that little feather, although it seems like nothing, is so important. If you forget to put it over this feather, you will only have loops underneath your stitching and really get problems. Now we have another thread guide. And also there, you just slap it in. There it is already. Very easy. Now we come to the take up lever. This is above the security you have here, so you never get your hands into it or your head if somebody is very far forward. Also, you take the shortest way. You came up here and you go straight through there. Its down motion feeds the thread to the needle, and its up motion tightens the loop formed by the shuttle. I'm just doing this with my hand wheel now, so you see the movement right there. Now going down, I do have another guide where I have to slide the thread into. A little bit underneath is the next one. It's actually quite easy if you just look along where you want to go with this thread. And here, just above the needle, is another guide where I have to put this thread into. This inside is actually called the needle bar. This is a steel rod to hold the needle in the position held with a screw on its end. The screw you can hopefully see with this video right here. That's where the end of the needle is held into this needle bar. Its main function is to give motion to the needle. As you can see, it's coming from the inside, that steel coming down to move this needle. So you only have one left hole to thread this thread through. In this case, on this machine, it is that I have to thread the thread from the left side to the right. Now, usually on one needle machines this is the case, but not always. On a household machine, as an example, you usually have to thread it from the front. But when you first buy a machine, usually the needles are put in position already. Then all you have to do to look either in the instructions, or you look how this needle has been put in. And you will find on one side of the needle there is a long groove put in. And that groove has a purpose when the needle goes down to pick up the thread from underneath, that the thread is really protected in that groove. And you see, well, you don't see it now, but I know, and I'm telling you, my long groove of the needle is here to the left side, and that tells me that is the side where my thread has to be put in. Just as an example, if you have a 2-needle machine, the usual is that both threads are put from the inside outwards through the needle. The reason is, depending on how the spool, the bobbin underneath, is positioned on that machine. That has something to do with how you got to thread this machine. So I show you a close-up again on how to thread the machine properly. Your thread came down from the spool pins, and you're going into the first thread guide, straight down, towards, it comes out in the back there, and you're coming from the back towards the front. So it's a straight line, nothing turned around. And here's the next guide. which follows automatically towards the front. There you go towards the back. You come out in the front again and you hang it over this feather that is here, as you can see. As I said before, this is not really a tension for the actual tension of the thread at the end. It's also a guide, which if you have problems with the thread, with the tightening, you can use it by tightening or loosening it a little bit. You go straight down and you get to the main tension holders, the tension disc with the two concave discs that are put together. As you can see, when I just take this thread, you can see our little spring here moving, as it always likes to tighten the thread again when later on the needle is moving. Here's the next guide where it has to go under the thread. You see that? Here's the next guide. You go straight up, and going straight up you get to your take up lever, which I said to you is in charge for the motion putting the thread up and down. On the other side you go down, and the next thread guide is there. It has to be in there. You go down, here's another guide, and here's a very important guide just above the needle where you have to go in because it makes sure that your thread will not rip. And then, as I explained before, you thread it in from the left on this particular machine, from the left to the right, as my long slip, my groove, is on the left side. You can see I can even put my nail in there and slide it up and down. So I had just lifted my hand lever, which I let down now, to continue. To be able to sew, of course, you do not only need your upper thread, you also need your spool threading. Therefore, you have next to your presser foot a little plate. It's called the slide plate. You can slide this plate open for easy to see how to change your bobbin case without lifting the whole machine up. Later, when you're firm with this, you will leave it closed anyway. But I show you, I'm putting my hand underneath, and you will feel this little lever here from this spool. I put it back in, and I get it out, and I show it to you. Very important on practically all machines is, very, very seldom, maybe on some two needle machines, you can put this spool in the other way. But mainly, you should always put the spool in the way your clock turns. Otherwise, your thread can wind up while if you do a very fast stitching and sewing. This is the correct way to put it in. Then you have this tensioner here where you have to slide it in. I do it again because maybe you can even hear this when I slide this in. So a little click, and right there you're exactly in the position to give this thread the right tension. You can see when I pull it quickly, it does not keep on spinning, and that is important. Otherwise the thread will wind up and gives you the next problem with your stitching, with your tension from upper and lower thread. So I cut this a little bit shorter as I pulled it out so far. And now you got your plate open. I usually do not open it because I know exactly where my bobbin is. You go underneath and you slap it in, and you don't let this lever go until you're really in. Now it's in. You can test it by pulling on the thread once. If it's not in correctly, your bobbin will fall out of the case out. So now you close this one again, this plate, because you don't want anything to fall in. And on many machines, on this one I would not need to have to pull the thread up, but I show you how to do this. Then you also see the function of the needle. I just lift my foot up, which takes also a little bit of tension away from the thread, and with a hand wheel I turn the needle down, and now you can see it will pull up my thread for my bobbin. There they are both, ready for me to stitch. My machine is a needle transport machine. That means you probably heard of the walking foot, or in Germany as we say, a Dreifach-Transport, a triple transport machine. This is not mine. I have a double transport. One is the needle. I'm going to put a very, very big stitch on now, so you see it really happening. Watch the needle moving. When I go in there, now the needle goes towards the back, pulling the material back at the same time. It's there, now it moves back. Now I stitch a little bit myself with a machine. Cut my thread off. So the needle transports the material, and what we have on the bottom is the feed dog. That consists a set of teeth fitted below the needle plate. It helps to move the clothes forward while sewing. But in my case, also the needle, which is very, very good with a double transport for any kind of sewing. Household machines usually only have the feed dog underneath. Very, very seldom you find a needle transport, and that's why you wonder sometimes why while you're stitching suddenly your material moves farther on and only the bottom is being transported. That is the reason. As you just noticed, I've been doing some hand moving because I do have a hand or flywheel, because every machine has this hand wheel. This is important if you just want to do a little stitch by hand and you're afraid you stitch too far if you move your feet for this. So you can slowly move it, or as I just shown you, you can pull your bottom thread up. That's all up to you, of course, how to do this. The plate next to the one we've just opened is the needle plate or throat plate called. It's a semi-circular disc with a hole to allow the needle to pass through it, and for the feed dog teeth to move the material above. If I lift my foot, you can see all these little teeth underneath here, and you see the big hole there for the needle. So if I wind it through, you can see my needle goes right in that hole, and at the same time, while the needle is doing the transportation, these little teeth are my underneath transport for my material, and they move down when they're at the back, they move up when they're in the front, and with the needle together they move the material back again. These are my two main transports on this machine. Now we move over to the right side of the machine, and you can see my stitch regulating here. When I push this part in, I can choose with this wheel if I want a very small or a very big stitch. As you can see, I got a long way to go there. This Pfaff machine has a really big option on a tiny, let's say 1 millimeter stitch up to over a centimeter. This lever is my lever for stitching back and forward while I'm sewing. But I also have another back and forwards possibility on this particular machine, and that is right here. I will show you. I start stitching very slowly. If I just push that one in, I go backwards. This is very good in case if I got very heavy and difficult materials that I don't know, where I actually need 3 or 4 hands to really hold it down, which always happens in some parts that you will be doing. Then all I have to do, I can hold this and I can still do my back and forward stitching without grabbing all the way to the end of the machine. It's very, very useful, and I had to use it in my days so many times. So on this upper machine, there's only one more part I like to show you. We can start right here actually, as I showed you before, that there's two spools on the top of the machine. And the second spool, which comes from my right, is to fill my bobbin. It has a normal thread guide here. I got another guide here. I'm going down to the actual tension, and right there all I have to do is push it on if it's empty, and it will automatically, while I do my other sewing, will fill my spool exactly the way I need it, totally full. One other thing you might have noticed up here is this very fancy cord, metal cord, whatever you want to call it. When I bought this machine, I had some huge lamp hanging over it. I didn't like this. It was always in my way. So I bought afterwards this LED lamp, which fastens onto my security guide here, which makes sure that I'm not going to injure myself. And my husband was so clever to just fasten it with a couple of clips. And what's so nice, I can really point it onto my needle and nowhere else. And all it needs is, if you follow the wire, you see that is the unit that it needs to get this nice little lamp onto it. Well, that is about all I want to tell you about this Pfaff 561, my favorite sewing machine. As you know, you got the pedal on the bottom. I do not have a knee lifter, as I got my automatic lifting on the foot, where I also put the power on with, or I got my little hand lever as well, which I can use. Well, so much more for the actual machine. I can't really tell you. I think I said all of it. Now I like to tell you about the engine of this Pfaff machine. Pfaff works together with a firm called Pfaff. The actual engine is from the firm Pfaff. Most of industrial machines are run by a high voltage engine with 400 volts, I believe. As I worked in big factories as well, in my own factory for my parents at home, this was always a big noise from all the machines running. And then years ago, suddenly I heard about this engine that I can have that only runs on 220 volts and does not make a noise. I didn't believe it in the beginning, but I show you right now, while the tone of the video recording is on, I turn my machine on right now. Now listen to this noise. You only heard a little click, which shows me I turned my machine on. Because with this engine and 220 volts only, this is only like on a standby. And I only use the power of it when I start sewing. You can see this, I'm not doing anything else, but my machine is turned on now. Of course you will hear it running now, the actual stitching doing. And that was it. Now maybe you wondered, what did she do with the thread? She didn't cut it off, but it was gone. Yes, because also in this machine I have an automatic thread cutter. That means I automatically lift my foot. I can do my back and forward stitching if I need it. I go on wherever I want to. And a little trick I can show you also. Sometimes, like making pockets as an example, you need a half a stitch. A full stitch would be too long. Then all you have to do is hold your lever here down a little bit and your stitches go much, much smaller. Otherwise you can stitch backward with that one the same as you can with this one. And if you're at the end of your seam, whatever, you click your foot backwards and it cuts your thread off on bottom and on the top. And this is a perfect machine. Whoever wants to buy a new one, I can only suggest to get this particular one. Now, don't think I'm getting any money from Pfaff because I'm doing this. No, believe me. It was one YouTube person who asked me 2 days ago, please, could you do a tutorial on your industrial machine? And that's what I did. And I hope you enjoyed it. Bye, until next time.